Would you just tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you do for WHE?
So, hi, I'm Mark Cartwright. I am the publishing director, which means I kind of look after the editorial team, which I always say looks after itself because they're such a good team. So we tend to have no particular hierarchy. We just discuss things if any issues come up. But so I'm overseeing that. And then there's of course director things and looking at the future and planning. But really I consider myself a writer, really, writing content, which is not how I started. I started with photographs and images of ancient sites, and while I was on holiday basically, and such beautiful buildings in Greece, I wanted to share it with people. So that's how I first got into the encyclopedia. And then I started to write about these sites, and I like doing that because I discovered the history of the place, got it clearer in my mind, found out interesting information, and then I summarized it. And so then the reader gets the benefit of a nice summary, and I get the benefit that I learned more about it, and hopefully more chance of remembering it. And then it became addictive. I just kept doing it again and again, and moving into different time periods was interesting because we started with antiquity. So I was really doing the Minoans and the Greeks and the Romans. But I've actually got an interest in most time periods, so I wanted to move forward, and I was quite enthusiastic to do medieval, and now early modern. And the interesting thing now, I think, is that the ability to make connections between time periods, things that run from antiquity through the Middle Ages to early modern and even our time. So that's interesting to see as we build the encyclopedia.
Right, yeah.
We're building a picture, a bigger picture. I always think it's like a jigsaw puzzle, history of humanity, and each article is a very small piece. But the more pieces we have and we cover, and the more you do as a writer, the clearer the picture comes. We probably, of course, we'll never have the whole picture, the whole puzzle finished, but I think you can get a clearer and clearer image the more you do. So that's really motivating for me, always to get to the next article, the next topic. So yeah.
Would you say that your what you do at World History Encyclopedia has sort of changed as the organization has grown? Do you feel like your responsibilities have shifted a little?
Oh, sure. I mean, when I started, I was just doing images, giving them, and then I was giving articles, and then I was invited to edit other people's articles, which, to be honest, I liked doing it, and I still like doing it, but I don't like doing it as much as I like writing. So I was happy when we had enough volunteer time for someone else to do that. But then I was still kind of like, you would train that editor what to do, pass on my experience of dealing with volunteers, and so yes. Then I'm in a supervisory role for that, and also I'm interested in the vision of the company, the strategic future. What should we do? How should we do it? Also learning other parts of the publishing besides writing, like how to make it more visible on the internet with Google search. So that's interesting to learn about who reads us and why people read us, and what they want to read, which formats, text length, what questions people are asking. So that's good. So yeah, it's progressed over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, and so in the sort of thinking about the company in the future, what's on your mind at the moment?
Well, we're always sort of seem to be fighting Google that it's, we have to make ourselves visible. So I think we're reasonably proud of what we produce, and it's good quality, and fortunately people tell us it is and they're happy. But I think our big problem is that people have to find us. So if you don't know WHE, then you're relying on Google probably. So then it's whether Google will show us up in your results page and how far we are down. So we've always got this to keep fighting to make sure we're up there near the top. So then you worry about the future. Could be that there's more competition from other websites, artificial intelligence, creating poorly written articles that are not accurate, but still easy to find. So I think, yeah, like anything, like a good restaurant in an old town, it's not easy to know. You might need to ask somebody else, or if you find it, then you make a note of it, like you would bookmark the website and say, yeah, I will go back there. So this sort of building a loyalty base, which we're doing with our members, and so I think that's very important. And the future, I mean, in terms of a writer, I would say perhaps going into even more modern times, because I do believe that obviously the more we get closer to today, the more relevance there are, but not necessarily. But so I'm looking forward to some stage maybe covering global conflicts or colonialism in Africa and things like that. These topics where it seems people are actually more and more interested in the different aspects of colonialism. That's an interesting thing, I think, for the future, is the way history is examined.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, in the past it was just like, oh, they did that, and and they did. This was a great empire from that point of view. So obviously now people are more interested. What about the people who were there? How were they badly affected? How badly were they affected? And what was going on before that? And now what's going on now? So I think that's an interesting avenue of exploration, is different viewpoints of history, and yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's a good thing that history is being examined slightly differently now than maybe when you and I went to school decades ago?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we are very familiar with the textbooks in various countries because we want to know what people need to know. And I'm always very impressed by how children are taught to analyze history now before they get to the actual history in some cases. And then looking at like what is a valuable source, what is an unreliable source, or maybe two sources that seem to be reliable, but we can compare them and they're giving a different story, so why is that? So I think children are being educated in that way, which we were not. It was basically learn the facts, learn the dates.
Yeah.
So I can see that history's become less focused on dates, which is nice because I have a terrible memory and can't remember dates, or the 52 kings of some kingdom that you can't remember. So that's I think a good thing to get away from that. It's much more human, I think, modern history. You can see that in academic books, that they're interested in the ordinary people. So it's less about the kings and the rulers, and it's more about the poorer people. How did they live? And so that's interesting, a more complete picture of ancient society. Whereas I think in the past we just focused on the elite. So, and looking also at different genders, that's a good thing as well.
Yeah.
Women's history, and it's often amazing how much we do know that hasn't been presented because people, maybe male historians, were not interested, I don't know. And so I think we're getting a richer jigsaw puzzle picture of history. It's much more complex than we thought. So I think that's an interesting way that it's going to develop.
Yeah, that's really good, yeah. And why do you think history is so important to study for our world?
Yeah, I think it's true, and many people would say it's not. So why do they say that? I don't know. In school curriculums, for example, even when I was at school 40 years ago, you had to choose between history and geography.
Oh,
Couldn't do the two together.
that's interesting.
So that was already somebody deciding humanities is less important than sciences, which you have to take those, have to take mathematics, have to learn a language. But I think obviously it's important because, one, it's a very interesting subject. I'm sure if you ask children, I was the same, that's like one of the most interesting things about school, is to learn about this stuff. You've got pictures and artifacts and things, and so, but I think obviously it's relevant to our lives, and we say you should learn from the past and it helps you in the future. Easy to say, and very few of us actually do it, but it's interesting, I think, to see how certain events are repeated in history. Certain behaviours are always the same. Like today we have a problem with the view of immigrants in many countries. It's very negative. Well, that's not a new thing. In ancient Greece, in Athens, they were very anti-non-Athenians, even though then there were other Greeks. But then when they looked into it, you can see that non-Greeks were doing very important things, like they might bring a new idea for pottery, a better way to make metals, for weapons. So they bring ideas. So this mixing pot, and the thing I've noticed, talking about immigration, is that all successful cities and cultures in history were mixed people.
Right.
You never had I think a society that excludes people has never prospered. So it's a dangerous thing today then, in that case, if you say, well, are we going to be the first successful country that doesn't let anybody else in, but will still be successful? Probably not. History tells us, no, you won't be. You have to be welcoming to new ideas and incorporate them, and everybody learns from everybody else. And then those people, in antiquity, for example, I'm sure the potters came and brought an idea to Athens, and then they stayed for a bit in Athens, and then they learned something in Athens, like mathematics or philosophy, and then they took those ideas back to their own place, so these ideas spread. So everybody's benefiting from this mix of ideas. So I'm for sort of this free exchange of ideas and people. I think it can only be beneficial. And I also think that people are quite similar anyway, when you get down to it and you meet people. Instead of reading about nations, you meet the individuals, and you see that we're actually quite similar.
Yeah,
and that's been true throughout history. I think a lot of people have been suspicious of their neighbours, of course, in history. But I'm sure an Athenian and a Spartan meeting in a little bar, probably they get on perfectly fine, but their states were at war. But I'm sure individually they were probably wondering, why are we enemies?
That's true, yeah. I mean, World History Encyclopedia has such an international team as well, really from almost every continent. Do you feel like having such an international team is beneficial for us as an organization?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, particularly history, because you're told at school, somebody's deciding what students should learn. And you kind of then just assume that, well, that's the important bits then. But then you meet someone from another country and you say, oh, we never studied that. We studied this. And I didn't study it. That's really important. So obviously as a professional, I'm getting to see this different history, but because I went on, but I'm thinking of my classmates at school 45 years ago. They didn't get any more history, so they're not seeing the other side of the world, other problems, other good things. So it's, I think the international team, and then from a business point of view, a working point of view, you get different ideas and different approaches, and to see that some people think in different ways. For some people, date and structure and chronology is very important. For other people, it's more about art or cultural side of history. So I think, this mix of individuals. I mean, I'm married to a French lady, and every day we have this different perspective of things, and it's interesting, and it makes you question, I think, what you take for granted, because until you see a different part of the world, you don't know what you're doing is actually just you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, I didn't realize everybody doesn't drink coffee at 10 o'clock, and say you shouldn't do this, or should do this with your cappuccino, and so on. So these different perspectives, and so I get that every day in my family life. So I think then the more the better, the more perspectives you have. You're then also covering our audience, which of course is multinational. So they perhaps have different expectations of what they want to see. So that's good to get feedback from the translators. Is a good element that we have that sort of extra editorial check from a sort of different perspective, perhaps.
And I was wondering, I think you're also very much looking at curricula around the world to sort of build our editorial plan. How do you go about that?
Yes, we want our writers, or our staff writers, but also our volunteers, to enjoy working with us, so covering topics that they're interested in, of course. But we also know that people are interested in very specific things, so teachers, students, or even general history enthusiasts. We can identify these topics by looking at places like curriculums, textbooks. And so we work as a staff writer would get a set of books and work for a certain period of time, or a video editor would do the same, or a creator of visuals would do the same, and create a sort of set on a theme. So we need to know what should we cover within that theme. So let's say we're going to cover the Etruscans. Well, how do people study the Etruscans? What's important? And sometimes it's obvious. So, you need the major cities and the major battles and the major rulers. But then looking at textbooks, I'm often surprised how much geography is emphasized. On the effect on the culture, climate, location, rivers, the proximity of neighbors, that kind of thing. So that's something that's important in textbooks and curriculums. And some names might come up that are emphasized more than you would think, perhaps because it represents a certain class of person or it's a female ruler. And so the textbook creator or the curriculum creator wants the children to look at different people, different levels of society. I've noticed that status in society is a topic that textbooks are very interested in. So if I were just to take a bunch of books on the Etruscans, then probably I'd cover about 70% of those curriculum topics, because I'm interested as well in that type of thing. But there would be some holes. So the curriculum gives us some structure of what to cover, how to cover, what kind of depth to cover. And the textbooks are very useful because we look at the questions that students are being asked and what they have to take away from a certain culture. And again, that's not necessarily obvious. So in fact, they're not having, like we had to do at school, just give a chronological history of England in 1 century, who was the king and who was the son of which king. They're not being asked that, really.
Right.
They might be being asked something else about that monarch. But was he a good monarch, or was he a bad monarch? Or why did they think he was a good monarch in the Middle Ages and now we think he's a bad monarch? So why is that? What's happened in
interpretation,
our study of history? Yeah, so that's not an obvious topic for a writer to just think, I'll do that one. So that's what we're doing. We're building a list of key topics on most time periods. We divide it into 4 time periods: ancient, Middle Ages, early modern, and then break it down into geographical areas usually, and then maybe specific cultures. And so we've got this huge document of things that we would like to cover. We don't necessarily have the capacity to, or we will do it in the future. And it's also it's useful, I think, for the members of WHE to visually see their progress, ticking off these things. Yeah, we've got that covered. Also, we have volunteers come regularly by email and say, hey, I'm an expert on Korean culture. I'd love to write about Korean culture. What do you want?
Right.
So I need to know something about Korean culture. So I can go to this curriculum document and I can say, oh, this topic and this topic, and I can send them a list of things, and they say, oh, that's very easy for me to write about because that's my field. And so we then get the article, and so in that way we're filling up this curriculum document, slowly ticking it off.
Right, I see, yeah. And which curricula from which countries are you looking at?
Yeah, we're looking at the USA because that's our largest audience segment. But we don't want to only do that, so we're looking at UK and Australia. So obviously anywhere where English is spoken is important because that's our primary language. But also now that we've got translations, it's become important to other countries like Spain and France. We're looking at what do they study, and there's a lot of crossover, of course. Julius Caesar seems to be popular everywhere, but then sometimes they're different. So I think, for example, Renaissance artists we've covered already, but I was looking from the English-speaking world perspective, their curriculum. So you had Michelangelo and whatever. But then looking at the Spanish curriculums and Spanish textbooks, they've got another set of artists, the Spanish ones, which maybe they're not so famous for us, but for the Spanish-speaking world, they're like, well, why haven't you covered these people?
Right.
So I think it gives us a much deeper coverage.
So once you have built this curriculum document, and I know that's a work in progress, of course, but how do you assign these different topics to the writers, and how do you schedule that then throughout the year?
So I don't like to impose topics on people. Like to get volunteering, even if they're not a volunteer anymore, they're paid, but because I think it's more motivating if you're writing something you're interested in. So once we've identified the topics, then we ask the staff writers maybe for a selection of what we think is the key things in the next year. Usually we work on a yearly basis. And so we say, we'd like to have this covered in this time. Which topic are you interested in? And so they'll say, oh, I'll pick that one, or I'll pick this one. So that kind of is how it's distributed, and then they get their set of books, and then they write on it. But we have the volunteers coming in all the time, so they can fill in gaps. But we like to have a balance as well, so we don't want everybody writing about the United States at the same time.
Right.
But have someone on that continent, someone writing on another continent, and hopefully a different time period as well. So someone's doing Middle Ages, someone's doing early modern, things like that. So that we're always publishing a variety of things anyway. but we are behind the scenes systematically covering something, each
Right.
person. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And finally, is there anything you would like to tell our audience, a little message to our readers and viewers, and about history, about World History Encyclopedia, life, anything
Mm.
really?
Well, I believe in going and seeing things yourself. Of course, it's not always possible. It can be expensive. Depends where you are in the world. But I would encourage people to not only read about it, but then go and see something. And you do get a feeling of places. Like when I visited ancient sites, you can very easily imagine Socrates wandering around this temple. So I think that gives you something, um, maybe a sense of perspective as well, and the context of the history in that culture, and also to experience the modern culture and contrast that with the ancient one, what's still there, what's not. So I would say, go out there and see for yourself.